In today's video, we decoupage with this beautiful napkin I found off Amazon, and then take this dark, dreary dresser and give it a beach-inspired makeover. Hey everyone, I have another video for you. This is actually my old dresser and nightstand. I originally found the pieces on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. They have been through a couple moves, so they definitely have some wear and tear, but we're going to take this set and make a complete and total transformation on them. All right, let's get started with some prep work. I was so excited to take this piece and make it over because I just don't think that the dark colors complement it very well. So I started cleaning and realized I hadn't removed my handles. So here you see me cleaning the piece and then removing the handles as I go. I am using my homemade spray. It is a mixture of half a cup of white vinegar, 2 tablespoons of baking soda. Make sure you add the baking soda to the vinegar over the sink because it will bubble. And then once the bubbling has settled, go ahead and fill your bottle the rest of the way with just tap water and shake. Give it a good shake to mix it up. There are lots of cleaners and degreasers out there that you can buy. I've been using this mixture for the last couple weeks, and I just think it cleans the surface very well and gets it prepped for some primer. Plus, it's more economic and environmentally friendly. After cleaning, I grab some warm water and a cloth and give the pieces a really good rinse. This step just wipes away the remaining cleaning residue and then gives your piece the best surface for your primer to adhere to. After letting the surface air dry, I roll the pieces outside and get to sanding. With the tops, I'm wanting to go with a more natural wood tone. So here I'm using some 80 grit sandpaper to remove the previous finish and stain and get back to the natural wood veneer that's underneath. I flip furniture for quite a few years now, so I feel comfortable using this 80 grit sandpaper on a veneer piece. If you are new to removing finish and stain and you have a veneer piece, I definitely wouldn't go below a 120. It will take you longer, but it will get done. And it lowers the chance of you blowing through the veneer. Now, after going over with the 80 grit, I go back over the piece with 120 grit sandpaper just to smooth it out. For the body of the dresser, I am using my Surf Prep sander with a foam abrasive pad to go over all the detail and get into that fluted strip at the top. And with this Surf Prep sander, I am using a fine grit sanding sponge. If you are doing this part by hand or with a detail sander, you would want to use 220 grit sandpaper. After sanding, I dusted the pieces off outside with my feather duster to knock off the big dust, and then roll the pieces back inside my paint booth to use a damp cloth and wipe away any remaining dust residue. All over the top of the dresser and the body of the dresser and nightstand are some faux wood worm worn looking areas, and I'm not a fan of that, so I grab my plastic wood filler in the natural color and would fill all those areas. I let that dry for about 20 minutes and then come back with a piece of 220 grit sandpaper and sand those areas level with the body or the surface. All Alright, off camera I did wipe the top of the dresser and the nightstand with a damp cloth to remove any dust residue from sanding. Let that air dry, and then here I am taping off the body of the dresser and the nightstand so it can be protected from my beige wash that I'm going to do. I like this light color of the natural wood, but I want an more even tone. So for my beige wash, I am using vintage paint in French beige in a 50-50 mixture with water. Apply it in a section. You don't want to work too big because it will dry out on you. So just brush it on and then come back with a cloth or a paper towel and wipe back some of your beige wash. Just repeat that process over and over, working in sections. If you work in sections too large, the beige wash will start to dry and it won't wipe off very well. I'd go through that process, let it dry the first coat for an hour, and then come back and do a second coat to get the look that I want. You can do this as many times as you want to. The more coats that you do though, the less you're going to see that wood grain. And then here you can see the beige color with some of the wood grain popping through. That wood grain will pop even more whenever we add the top coat. To prepare for top coat, I grab my 400 grit sandpaper and then lightly go over the surface. I'm not really putting any pressure here because I don't want to take any of my beige wash off. I just want to make sure I have that very silky, smooth, flat surface before top coat. This is my Gator Hide sponge in a pair of pantyhose. Mist the sponge, and then you're going to apply the top coat. I'm working in sections here, going with long stripes. I kind of divide the top of the dresser into thirds, the front, middle, and back. So here I'm applying it to the front section, get it along the entire front part, and then go back over it with long swipes. So if there are any streaks, they're at least going in the direction of the wood grain. The pantyhose really do help allow for like no streaks, which I'll show you here after I'm done applying a couple coats of top coat. So I apply this first coat, let it dry for 2 hours, use that 400 grit sandpaper to lightly sand dust the surface off, and then apply a second coat and let that dry. And then you can see the light shining in. The wood grain is beautiful and visible, and you don't see any streaks from the first 2 coats of top coat that I applied with that sponge. For the body of the dresser and the nightstand, I'm going to spray my primer with my gun. There's lots of different ratios. I use the 8-to-1 ratio. I'm going to fill the primer to that 8 marker on the left column. I'm using the 8 because this is a really large set, so I know I'm going to use a lot of primer to get the coats and coverage that I want. And then the water I'm going to add to that second 8. So I skip the 8 in the middle and pour water all the way to the second 8 and then mix it thoroughly. Put the filter on. This is why I don't filter my paint or primer, because it's built into my lid. And then attach my 3M AccuSpray is the gun that I use to spray. The AccuSpray is a gravity-fed paint gun that does require an air compressor, at least a 30-gallon, if not larger. I go ahead and connect my gun to the air hose. The pressure is about a 70 there, and I'm going to wait till the pressure to build up to about a 90 or 100, and then test spray. I make sure to spray horizontally and vertically to make sure that the primer is spraying the way that I want. Once I'm happy, I go ahead and start spraying the piece. The body of this set is black, and I'm going with a much lighter shade of paint. So it's definitely going to take 2 coats of primer. Now I'm using water-based primer because this isn't like a paint or a stain. It's some kind of enamel finish, so I don't have to really worry about any bleed through. So water-based primer is okay for this set. I've noticed other people who spray their furniture pull the drawers out and use some 3M tape that has plastic wrap. I just feel like that's an extra expense. If you want to leave your drawers in and you're okay with a little bit of overspray, I pull them out, spray the top, line the drawers up, spray the sides, and then push all the drawers into the body and then spray across the front of the drawers. And this is a really good way to avoid spending that extra money on that. And it does get a tiny bit of overspray on the edges, but I've been spraying for a while now and I've never had a customer complain about that. So that is how I spray my drawers. If overspray is something that really bothers you on the sides of the drawers, you could always tape the sides of the drawer and then go across the opening of the drawer and tape the other side to block any extra overspray from getting in the drawer, on the sides of the drawer. Now this set, I know I'm going to do something fun on the sides of the drawer, so I didn't even bother taping them off because I'm going to cover that later anyways. So your first coat of primer is really great for showing out any areas that you miss with wood filler and all that. So I let the first coat dry and noticed a lot of spots that weren't as level and as flush as I wanted to give this a clean look. So off camera, I wood filled that, dried, sanded it level, and then it came back with my sanding sponge. This is a fine grit sanding sponge. I'll put the link down in the description. I get those off Amazon, but I'm going over the surface here to prime and prep for, I'm sorry, not to prime, but to get ready for my second coat of primer. You can see here there are actually a lot of areas that I was not happy with the way that it looked with just that first coat of wood filler. So, but that's okay. The second coat of primer is going to cover all that up. After sanding, dust the surface off, and then we are ready to start spraying that second coat of primer. You can see here I have my ventilator mask on, but I forgot to wear my head or hair cover. So after the second coat of primer, I let that dry, and this is where the set is at. But after all that spray primer, this is where I'm at. I have primer on my nose, in my hair, which is not okay. This is late at night, so I had to take a shower, and you can't have wet dreadlocks when you go to bed, so I had to use my dryer bonnet. This is not a good look for me, so please cover your hair if you have dreadlocks. All right, so you can teach an old dog new tricks. I've got my hair cover on today. I let the primer sit overnight, and I'm doing one last sanding with that fine grit sanding sponge, dust the surface off, and then we'll be ready to paint. All right, so I have my decoupage napkin that I'm going to use on the sides of the drawer for inspiration on color, and I've got some old paint that I need to use up, so I'm going to try to walk you through the process. These are all Behr chalk paints. That is my color Wave that I bought a while ago, so I want to use it up before it goes bad. And then I have some Fossil Gray. What I'm trying to do is lighten up the blue of the Wave and kind of make of it more of like a aqua light turquoise color. This is 10 white that I'm adding in because the gray didn't lighten it up enough, so I added some white, and then I added a little bit more of the Fossil Gray in. I'm just thoroughly mixing here each time so I can see what color I have. It's still not light enough for me, so I add some more of the 10 white in here, and I'm just playing around, adding different paints, trying to get this beach color inspiration color that I want. All right, I'm getting there, but I'm not quite there yet. So I dumped some of the paint out so I have more room to work with it. And I grab my green silk from Behr chalk paint, add a little bit of green because I want more of a turquoise and not blue shade. I do that a couple times, getting more of that turquoise shade that I want. Decided it wasn't light enough, so this is Downtown Gray because I ran out of my Fossil Gray, so I started adding Downtown Gray, and finally I'm happy with that color. I didn't measure anything, so if you want to repeat that color, I don't know what to tell you. I'm so sorry. I just mixed and went with it. Doesn't that color just scream beach vibes? I love it. It's beautiful, light aqua turquoise color, and it's just perfect for the look that I'm going to go for. Let's take a second and just watch the transformation happen. Why I love spraying, because it's much quicker and there's no brush marks. You can see some marks there from spraying, but those level out as the paint dries. I let the first coat of paint dry for 2 hours, grabbed that fine grit sanding sponge, lightly went over the surface, dusted the surface off with a lint-free cloth, applied a second coat, repeated that process all over again with 3 coats total of paint for full coverage. I let that last coat of paint dry for a couple hours and then went to removing the butcher paper and tape I had to tape the top off, which I forgot to tell you that I did that. I did block off the top to protect it while I was spraying the body. But here I am removing all of that painter's tape. Ah, perfection. Okay, not really. There were a couple of spots I needed to touch up, so I grabbed a small artist brush and touched those up before top coat. It would be absolutely wonderful if everything I did was perfect, but you know, I'm a human, not a factory, so that doesn't happen. But that's what touch-up paint's for. All right, final sanding before top coat. So I sand each area like in small sections and run my hand over to make sure it is completely smooth surface. And then wipe the surface free of any dust residue. One of the things I love about my gun is how easy it is to switch back and forth between paint, top coat, or paint colors. You just put it in a new liner. I did rinse the nozzle out under some tap water. My top coat here, I'm pouring it in there. I'm going to pour it to the middle 8 of my little 8-to-1 ratio chart that I use, and then add water to the 8 on the far right, and then mix that. I don't normally water down my top coat, but it's really hot here, so I am going to add a little bit of water to thin it out. That just allows a little bit more time for it to settle and level out before it starts to dry and cure. Another reason why I like to spray versus painting by hand is that it's much quicker here. So I don't have this sped up at all. This is actual real time. And it is about 1 minute and 15 seconds that I'll leave here for you guys to watch. And that is how long it took me to top coat the entire nightstand. Spraying your top coat just allows for that glass-like finish. Like you can see my reflection of spraying on the side. And it just gives it that smooth feel and smooth look that's just very professional to me. So I did do 2 coats of top coat with sponge on the very top. That was to protect it if I got any of the aqua paint on it. I could just wipe it away with a damp cloth. And also, I like to put more layers of top coat on the top of my dressers, nightstands, buffets than I do the body. So by the time I'm done, the top of the dresser and nightstand will have 5 coats of top coat and the body will have 3. If you don't have a fancy sprayer like mine, that's fine. You can do all of the painting and top coat by hand. It's just going to take you a lot longer. While I wait for the first coat of polyurethane to dry, I went inside and started on the handles. I used some Dawn dish soap and an old toothbrush and scrubbed each handle thoroughly, rinse it off, and set it aside to air dry. Once the handles were dry, I did go ahead and take them outside, and then I flipped them the wrong way first and grabbed my Rust-Oleum's metallic gold, and I sprayed a coat of spray paint, let that dry for a couple hours. After the first coat of top coat was dry, I grabbed that very fine grade sanding sponge, went over the surface, dusted it free of any dust residue, and then started applying the second coat. So each time I sprayed the nightstand first and then sprayed the dresser. So while I was spraying the nightstand, I had a blanket over the dresser to cover it to keep dust from settling or any overspray from settling onto the dresser. And I just repeated that process again for having 3 coats final of spraying on the body of the dresser. And then there's 5 coats on the top. Again, 2 with the sponge and then 3 from spraying. Once the backside of the handles were dry, I flipped them over, applied 2 coats of gold on the front side. Once that was dry, I grabbed my clear mat and added a protective coat to the handles and let that dry. I was originally going to just decoupage the sides, but I noticed an issue. One on the dresser is wooden drawers and the nightstand's black, so let's make them match. I grabbed some 120 grit sandpaper and just lightly sand the surface so it's nice and smooth to get ready to paint. After sanding, I use my feather duster to knock off a large amount of the dust and then go back over it with a damp cloth to remove the remaining dust residue. Once the drawers were dry, I grabbed some painter's tape and taped off the front face of the drawer because those are finished and I don't want to get any of my chalk paint on them. So I grabbed my favorite chalk paint, that's Bear chalk paint, and this is the color 10 white. So I'm going to paint around the edges of the inside of the drawer and also paint the outside of the drawers. On the drawers that were wooden, it just took 1 coat. The drawers that were black, I did do 2 coats of white. After the paint was dry, I grabbed that Varathane water-based polyurethane and applied a thin coat for protection and let that dry. One of the drawers, there was a stain in the bottom, so let's cover that up and plus make them all match. So I am measuring left to right, adding a 1/2 inch, and then front to back, adding 1/2 inch. This is some peel and stick wallpaper that I ordered off Amazon. And I just measure it out, cut it. It makes it super simple because there's lines on the back, so it's really easy for measuring and cutting. And then you peel the back off and then place it very carefully down into the drawer. What I like about the peel and stick wallpaper is some of it's really thin, so you have to be careful peeling it back up. For most of it, it's pretty thick, so you can pull it back up if you lay it incorrectly. So you get as many tries as you need to get it lined up. And then you press it down, smooth out any air bubbles. Again, if you need to, you can peel it back up and press it down until you get that smooth, flat surface. And then I like to take my Pampered Chef scraper and kind of push the peel and stick wallpaper into the edges. And then I grab my box knife and I'm just cutting along the crease of the drawer to cut off any excess wallpaper. And then just peel the excess off and you're done. For the size of the drawer, I fell in love with these napkins I found on Amazon. When you unfold the napkins, it's basically the same pattern, just 4 times. So I just took my scissors and cut each square into 4 pieces. And then I took the piece and I trimmed even more around the detail. These are 2-ply napkins, so I just separated it and pulled off the second sheet. So I had the thin sheet with the pattern remaining. Before applying it, I did kind of check for placement. Once I was happy, I grabbed that polyurethane, applied a thin coat. You want a thin coat, not thick coat, because thick will cause wrinkles into your tissue paper. So you apply that thin coat and then just place the pattern up there where you desire. You're going to lay it down and then smooth out the wrinkles as best as you can. Just remember not to work with this too much because it is very thin tissue paper and you can tear it. If you have an area that's not sticking because you didn't apply enough poly on the underside, just gently peel it back up and add some poly and place it back down. Then you're going to get a little bit more of that poly on your brush and apply a thin coat. Again, try not to work it too much because this is thin tissue paper, which gets soggy when it's wet. But there it is, and I do that on both sides. Now this has a pattern, and just take note of how you place it the first time. So I'm doing purple flower on the down edge, and I repeat that process on both sides of every single drawer. So I did this over and over and over, but the outcome was amazing. Here's a quick look at our before of this dark, heavy, dreary dresser. And our after. This set is just so much lighter now and it just seems happier. I love this beach inspired makeover. I love the light natural wood tones next to the aqua. The drawers are lined. The sides of the drawers are decoupage. So this is definitely one of a kind and just an overall beautiful piece. I love how it turned out. All right, so let's talk about the numbers. I bought the dresser years ago off Facebook Marketplace for I think $200. The nightstand I found for free in a separate post. I definitely was lucky finding that one. I spent $45 on supplies listed on a Facebook Marketplace. It has sold for $750. It was 9 hours of labor, so that totals out to be $56 an hour. Woohoo! I hope you guys enjoyed this flip as much as I did. I have some fun and exciting stuff coming up for the month of October. So if you haven't already, go ahead, like, subscribe, hit the bell. As always, until next time.